If the rooms you've lived in for years suddenly feel like they're arranged differently, even though nothing actually moved, you're not imagining it, and you're not losing your mind. Something in the architecture of your inner life shifted recently, and your body noticed before your mind caught up. Maybe you walked into your own kitchen and paused half a second too long, like a guest in a house you've lived in for a decade. Maybe a hallway that used to feel neutral now feels charged, like it's holding a conversation you haven't had yet. That's not a coincidence, and it's not you being dramatic. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because there are 3 specific, unmistakable signs that your inner architecture has been rebuilt from the inside out, and once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them in yourself. This isn't about vague cosmic energy or empty affirmations. This is about what happens in the days after a numerologically loaded date lines up with some of the most emotionally saturated planetary weather of the year. A stretch where the planet of thought is moving backward through the sign of home and feeling, where the sun is still lingering in that same watery territory before crossing into bolder ground, and where the collective's sense of direction has been quietly reorganizing itself behind the scenes. You didn't need to know any of that to feel it. Deep feelers rarely need the technical explanation to know something has changed. You just know the walls moved. Here's what actually happened, in plain terms. Numbers like 7 don't get spiritual attention by accident. In almost every tradition that uses numerology, 7 is the number of introspection, inner structure, and the completion of a cycle that started somewhere quieter than most people noticed. When a month and a day both carry that number, the emphasis doubles. It's less like a single knock at the door and more like someone testing every hinge in the house at once, checking what's still sound and what's been held together with tape for longer than anyone wants to admit. That test landed on top of a planetary backdrop that was already mid-renovation. The planet that governs thought, communication, and the stories we tell ourselves had already turned backward through the sign most associated with home, memory, and emotional safety. And it's staying there for several weeks, not just passing through. When that planet moves in reverse through that particular sign, you don't usually get new information. You get old information resurfacing at a louder volume. Add to that a sun that hasn't yet crossed into bolder, more visible territory. It's still sitting in that same emotionally saturated sign, keeping the emphasis on feeling before showing. And underneath all of it, the axis that governs the collective's sense of direction and purpose is in its final stretch of a placement built around dissolving boundaries, intuition, and permeability, right before it swings towards something far more detached and future-facing. Put those 3 things in the same room, and you get exactly what a lot of people are describing right now without knowing why. A stretch where the emotional walls of daily life feel thinner than usual, where things you'd normally brush off are landing with real weight, and where your own inner sense of direction feels like it's being quietly resurveyed. None of this is happening to you as a punishment, and it isn't a test you can fail. It's closer to a structural inspection. Deep feelers, people whose nervous systems are built with fewer insulating layers between themselves and the world, are almost always the first to notice when the inspection begins, because you feel the vibration in the floorboards before anyone else hears the footsteps. One more thing before we get into the signs themselves, because it matters. Deep feeler isn't a diagnosis, and it isn't a personality quiz result you either qualify for or don't. It's simply a way of describing a nervous system that processes more incoming information per minute than the average system was built to filter. More tone of voice, more micro-expression, more unspoken tension in a room, more of the emotional residue other people leave behind without noticing they've left anything at all. Some of you were born this way. Some of you became this way through circumstances that required you to read a room accurately in order to feel safe in it. Either way, it isn't a flaw to be managed down to a more convenient size. It's closer to a high-resolution instrument that happens to be more expensive to run, and expensive instruments always register more when the conditions around them intensify. That's exactly what's happening right now, not a malfunction. A high-resolution instrument doing exactly what it's built to do, at a moment when there's more signal in the air than usual for it to pick up. That's the backdrop. Now here's what it actually looks like, lived out in 3 signs. You may recognize one. You may recognize all 3. Either way, by the end, you'll have language for something you've probably already been sensing, but couldn't explain to the people who keep asking if you're okay, and don't understand why. The only honest answer is, I don't know, I just feel different, without being able to say different how. Let's start with the one that shows up first, sometimes within the same day. It's the one that convinces people they've suddenly become too sensitive, when really, they're just standing closer to the part of the house that's under renovation. Sign 1. The walls that used to hold weight without complaint are suddenly announcing themselves. You might notice it in something as small as background noise, the hum of a refrigerator, a co-worker's voice through a thin wall, a television in another room, registering as too much when a few weeks ago you wouldn't have consciously heard it at all. You might notice it in rooms full of people, where you used to hold 3 conversations in your peripheral awareness, and now you can barely hold one before you need to step outside and remember how to breathe at your own pace again. This isn't you becoming too sensitive out of nowhere. This is what happens when a load-bearing wall gets tested. Think about how a structural inspection works. Nobody walks around tapping decorative trim. Inspectors go straight for the walls holding the roof up, because those are the ones that matter, and testing them always shakes a little dust loose, makes a small creak sound louder than it should. The parts of you that have been quietly holding up your daily functioning, the boundaries you set without noticing you'd set them, the emotional buffers you built without a blueprint, the pacing you use to get through a full day without collapsing by mid-afternoon. Those are being tested right now. And when a load-bearing wall gets tested, of course, it announces itself. That's not weakness. That's the wall doing exactly what it's supposed to do under pressure, making itself known before it's asked to hold more than it can carry. Picture the specific moment it usually happens. You're somewhere ordinary, a checkout line, a family dinner, a video call that's run 15 minutes over, and nothing dramatic occurs. No conflict, no bad news, nothing you could point to afterward and say, that's what did it. And yet somewhere in the middle of it, your chest tightens, your patience thins to almost nothing, and you catch yourself calculating exactly how many minutes stand between you and a door you can close behind you. That calculation is not an overreaction to the checkout line. It's your system running a live structural assessment in real time of exactly how much more weight this particular wall can take today before it needs relief. Most people never consciously run that calculation. You've probably been running it your whole life without naming it. Right now, the answer it's giving you is simply lower than usual, and that's useful information, not a character flaw. Here's where it gets specific to deep feelers. If you're someone whose nervous system processes the emotional undertone of a room before you consciously register a single word, this stretch is going to feel like every undertone got turned up several notches. Someone says their week was fine, and you feel with total certainty that it wasn't. A person walks into the room, already carrying tension from something that happened an hour earlier, somewhere else entirely, and you know it before they speak, and now you're holding it too, without ever agreeing to. This has probably been true of you for years. What's different right now is the volume. The walls that usually filter some of that incoming information down to a manageable hum are, for these few weeks, letting almost everything through at full strength, unfiltered. You might have already started making changes without fully deciding to, cancelling plans that would have been easy a few weeks ago, needing the car ride home to stay silent instead of filled with a podcast, choosing the seat with your back to the wall instead of the open room, not because you're anxious, but because your system is asking for one less direction to monitor at once. If that sounds familiar, you're not being difficult and you're not overreacting. You're doing structural maintenance in real time, and you're doing it well, even if it feels clumsy from the inside. The mistake most people make here is trying to force the wall back to how it was, pushing through the overstimulation, apologizing for needing quiet, treating the sensitivity like a malfunction instead of a signal. But a wall that's been tested and found still standing is more trustworthy afterward, not less. You're not falling apart. You're finding out, with more precision than usual, exactly which parts of your daily structure were built to last and which ones need reinforcing before you build anything else on top of them. That information is valuable. Most people never get it this clearly. You're getting it right now, whether you ask for it or not, and the fact that you noticed it all already tells you something about how finely tuned your instruments are. If you want one practical way to work with this sign specifically, it's simpler than it sounds. Build in a buffer before you need one, instead of waiting until the wall is already straining. That might mean 5 silent minutes in the car before you walk into a house full of people. It might mean stepping out of a group conversation for a moment of actual quiet before you're asked a direct question you don't have the bandwidth to answer honestly. You're not being antisocial. You're doing routine maintenance on a structure that's currently under more load than usual. And structures that get maintained on schedule rarely need emergency repair later. Sign 2 moves deeper into the structure, past the walls and into the blueprints themselves. The original plans your life was drawn from before other people's expectations got added as extensions you never fully approved. You'll know this one by what starts resurfacing without invitation. A person you haven't thought about in years crosses your mind out of nowhere, and by the next day you hear their name somewhere unrelated, or they message you first. A dream you had as a much younger version of yourself, the one you quietly shelved because it seemed impractical or because someone you trusted said it wasn't realistic, starts showing up in half-formed thoughts while you're doing something completely unrelated, like washing a dish or waiting at a red light. An old wound you thought you'd finished processing opens back up, not because anything new happened, but because the original blueprint is being pulled out of storage and compared against the building as it currently stands. This is what happens when the planet of thought retraces its steps through the sign of memory and home. It isn't handing you anything new. It's walking you back through rooms you built years ago and asking quietly whether they still serve the structure or whether they were only ever meant to be temporary. Add to that the deeper, slower planets beginning their own backward turn through a sign associated with identity and forward motion, and you get a much bigger question sitting underneath the smaller memories. Is the direction I've been building toward actually mine? Or is it a direction I inherited from a blueprint someone else handed me before I was old enough to read it critically. Deep feelers tend to experience this less as a thought and more as a mood that arrives without an obvious cause. A sudden, specific nostalgia for a version of your life that never actually happened. A quiet grief for a choice you made years ago that you still believe was right, but that you're only now allowing yourself to fully feel the weight of. An unexpected tenderness toward your younger self, the one who built the first draft of this blueprint with far less information than you have now and did the absolute best they could with it. None of this means you made mistakes. It means the blueprint is being reviewed, and reviewing a blueprint is not the same as condemning the building. You might also notice this showing up in your relationships specifically. Conversations that circle back to old, unresolved dynamics with more clarity than they've ever had before. A boundary you've been meaning to set for months, finally finding its words, almost involuntarily, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary conversation. An apology, given or received, that's been sitting unfinished for so long it had started to feel like it would never actually happen, suddenly completing itself. These aren't random. They're the direct result of old material getting pulled back into the light, so it can be looked at honestly, measured against who you are now, instead of who you were when it was first drawn up. Pay attention to what resurfaces around work and creative direction specifically. A career path you talked yourself out of because it seemed impractical, at the time might resurface not as regret, but as genuine, specific curiosity. You find yourself researching it late at night for no obvious reason, the way you'd look something up out of pure interest rather than active planning. A creative project you abandoned half-finished years ago might suddenly feel unfinished in a way that actually bothers you, instead of just sitting quietly in the back of a drawer where you'd made peace with leaving it. This is the blueprint asking a very specific question. Which additions to this structure were load-bearing extensions of who you actually are, and which ones were added later by circumstance or by someone else's opinion of what was sensible, without ever being checked against the original plan? The temptation here is to treat every resurfacing memory or relationship as an emergency that needs fixing immediately, right now, before you've had time to actually look at it clearly. Resist that. A blueprint under review doesn't need to be redrawn in a single sitting. It needs to be looked at with curiosity instead of panic. What in this old plan still holds true? What was drawn by someone who didn't yet know what you know now? You don't have to answer those questions this week. You just have to notice that they've been asked, because noticing is the entire function of this particular sign. Right now, your only job is to actually look at the plans instead of shoving them back in the drawer, because looking feels uncomfortable. Sign 3 is the quietest of the three and the easiest to dismiss, because it doesn't announce itself with discomfort the way the first two do. It shows up as a shift in how light enters the building. A change in orientation so subtle that most people won't notice it happened until they try to explain to someone else why they suddenly know things they have no obvious way of knowing. You'll catch it in small, specific moments. You think of a song, and it plays somewhere within the hour, completely unprompted. You have a passing thought about a person you haven't spoken to in months, and your phone lights up with their name before the thought has even fully finished forming. You walk into a space, a room, a meeting, a gathering, and you know within seconds exactly how the whole thing is going to feel before a single word has been exchanged, and you're right every time in a way that started to feel less like a hunch and more like reading a room the way you'd read a floor plan. This is the North Node completing its final stretch through the most permeable, intuitive sign in the zodiac, right before it crosses into a placement built on distance, objectivity, and future-facing logic. Think of it as a building reaching the very last days of a particular orientation to the sun. The angle the windows have been catching light at for nearly 2 years, right before construction shifts everything, and the light starts entering from a completely different direction. Right now, in these final weeks, that old orientation is at its most complete, most saturated version of itself. If you've spent any part of the last 2 years developing your intuition, deepening your sensitivity, learning to trust the quiet, knowing that doesn't come with an explanation attached, this is the stretch where all of that training reaches its clearest expression before the angle shifts and a new kind of learning begins. Deep feelers often describe this particular sign as disorienting in a good way, if that makes sense. Not overwhelming like sign 1, not emotionally loaded like sign 2, just quietly, undeniably different. You reach for your keys and somehow already know which drawer someone else moved them to. You start a sentence at the exact moment someone else was about to say the same thing. You feel a shift in the emotional temperature of an entire room half a beat before anyone speaks, and instead of absorbing it and carrying it like you might have with sign 1, you simply notice it, clearly, the way you'd notice which way the light was falling across a floor. If you want a simple way to work with this sign instead of talking yourself out of it, try keeping a running note somewhere, your phone, a scrap of paper by the bed, of exactly what you sensed and when, before you find out whether you were right. Not as proof for anyone else. As a record for yourself, because the mind is remarkably good at retroactively downgrading a hit to a lucky guess once the confirming information arrives. Written down in the moment, before you know the outcome, it stops being deniable. Most deep feelers already have more evidence of their own accuracy than they give themselves credit for. They just never wrote it down while it was still happening, so it got quietly filed under coincidence instead of competence. The mistake with this sign is explaining it away, calling it coincidence, deciding it's nothing, because acknowledging it feels like admitting to something you don't have a tidy, logical explanation for. But you don't need a tidy explanation for windows to be catching a particular quality of light before construction changes the angle permanently. You just need to notice that it's happening while it's still happening, because this specific orientation, this specific quality of intuitive light, won't stay exactly like this. It's already shifting. Here's the part most people miss. These 3 signs aren't separate events happening to unrelated parts of you. They're one inspection, moving through one building in a logical order. Sign 1 starts at the walls, because that's the outer layer, the part that meets the world first and takes the initial impact. Sign 2 moves inward to the blueprints, because once the outer layer has been tested, the natural next question is whether the plan underneath it still holds up. Sign 3 finishes at the windows, the part of the structure responsible for what gets to come in and how clearly you can see out. Because once the walls are tested and the blueprint reviewed, the last thing left to check is your actual visibility. How well you can perceive what's real once the dust from the first 2 signs has settled. If you experienced all 3 in that order, walls first, then memory, then clarity, that's not a coincidence. That's the inspection following its own internal logic, room by room, exactly the way a thorough one should. Not everyone experiences all 3 at equal intensity, and that's worth naming honestly instead of implying you're somehow doing this wrong if you didn't. Some people are almost entirely a sign 1 experience this stretch, pure sensory and emotional volume, with barely any old memories resurfacing. Others are living almost entirely inside sign 2, wading through old blueprints, while their day-to-day sensitivity to noise and crowds barely shifted at all. That variation isn't a flaw in the framework. It's a reflection of which part of your particular structure most needed attention right now. The inspection goes where the building actually needs it, not where a generic checklist says it should. So here's what happens if you brush past all 3 of these signs. Tell yourself you're just tired, just stressed, just imagining things, and go back to living exactly as you did before any of this started. Nothing catastrophic. Nobody's life falls apart because they missed a structural inspection. But small cracks that could have been caught early tend to widen slowly instead, quietly, in places you're less likely to notice until the pattern's already repeated itself 2 or 3 more times. The overstimulation from sign 1 gets pushed down instead of listened to, and it resurfaces later as burnout that seems to come from nowhere. The old blueprint from sign 2 gets shoved back in the drawer instead of reviewed, and you keep building on top of assumptions that were never actually yours to begin with. The intuitive clarity from sign 3 gets explained away so many times that you start trusting it a little less each time, until the volume on your own inner knowing turns down by default instead of by choice. None of that is permanent. None of it is a life sentence. But it is avoidable. And it's avoidable specifically because you're someone who already has the sensitivity required to catch these signs while they're still fresh, while the walls are still visibly announcing themselves instead of quietly deteriorating in the background. That's not a small thing. Most people go through stretches exactly like this one without ever consciously noticing a single sign. You're not most people, or you wouldn't have made it this far into a video about the architecture of your own inner life. So here's what to actually do with all of this. Not a checklist, not 5 new habits to force onto an already full schedule, just 3 honest questions, 1 for each sign, to sit with over the next few days. For the load-bearing walls, where in your life have you been holding weight without support? And what would it look like to ask for reinforcement instead of proving you can carry it alone? For the blueprint, what belief about your own direction did you inherit rather than choose? And is it still true now that you're the one holding the pen? For the light, what have you sensed clearly in the last few days that you talked yourself out of trusting? And what changes if you simply write it down instead of dismissing it? You don't need answers to all 3 today. You just need to actually ask them, out loud or on paper, somewhere you'll come back to. If one of these 3 signs hit differently than the other 2, that's not random. That's the exact part of your inner structure asking for attention first. Tell me which one in the comments. Not because I need to know, but because naming it out loud is usually the first real step in actually working with it, instead of just feeling it happen to you. And if none of the 3 signs applied entirely, but something in this still felt uncomfortably accurate, that's worth sitting with too. Sensitivity doesn't always show up in the 3 most obvious places. Sometimes it shows up as a strange, specific relief at finally hearing someone describe what's been happening without you having to explain it first. If you're the kind of person who processes things better in writing than in your own head, try this before the day ends. Write 1 sentence for each sign, starting with "I noticed." Not an explanation, not a justification, just the observation itself. I noticed I needed the car ride home to be silent. I noticed I've been thinking about a person I haven't spoken to in 3 years. I noticed I knew what someone was about to say before they said it. 3 sentences. That's the whole exercise. You'd be surprised how much clarity comes from simply naming what you already sensed instead of letting it dissolve back into the general fog of "I've just felt off lately." And if you know someone else who fits everything described in this video, someone who reads a room before anyone speaks, who's been unusually quiet or unusually intense this past week, who keeps saying they feel different without being able to explain how, send this their way. Deep feelers are notoriously bad at explaining their own internal experience to people who process the world differently. Sometimes the kindest thing you can hand someone is language for what they've already been sensing alone. Here's what I want you to walk away with, more than any single sign. You are not being broken down right now. You are being reinforced. Every wall that's been tested and held, every blueprint that's being honestly reviewed instead of blindly followed, every window catching this particular angle of light for what might be the last time in this specific configuration. All of it is construction, not collapse. Deep feelers spend so much of their lives being told they're too much, too sensitive, too aware of things nobody else seems to notice. This is the stretch where that exact sensitivity becomes the most valuable instrument in the building. You're not falling apart. You're the one who noticed the renovation was happening in the first place, while everyone else just felt vaguely off and couldn't say why. Think about what that actually means about you. Somewhere in a crowded room this week, while everyone else was talking about the weather or the traffic or whatever surface-level thing filled the silence, you were the one who felt the tension shift before it was spoken, while someone else brushed off a strange coincidence as random chance. You clocked it quietly and filed it away as one more piece of evidence for something you've suspected about yourself for a long time. That kind of perception isn't common. It isn't available to everyone. It's the direct result of a nervous system that spent years, maybe your entire life, learning to read what wasn't being said out loud. And instead of that skill being a burden you have to apologize for, this stretch is showing you plainly exactly how sharp it's become. Before we close, one honest caveat, because deep feelers deserve honesty more than they deserve comfort, dressed up as certainty. None of this replaces attention to your actual physical well-being. If what you're feeling is closer to persistent distress than heightened sensitivity, if it's affecting your sleep, your ability to function, or your sense of safety in a way that doesn't ease with rest and quiet, that's worth bringing to a professional who can actually sit with you and look at the full picture, not just the cosmic weather. Everything in this video is offered as reflection and pattern recognition, not as a substitute for that kind of care. Held that way, alongside real support when you need it, this framework can be genuinely useful. Held instead of real support, it isn't doing its job. None of the three signs we walked through are asking you to fix yourself. There's nothing broken here that needs repairing before you're allowed to move forward. A building under structural review isn't a building in crisis. It's a building being taken seriously enough to be checked properly, instead of being left to quietly deteriorate because nobody thought it was worth the inspection. You are being taken that seriously right now by whatever combination of timing, numbers, and planetary weather you want to credit for it. Whether or not you believe in any of the mechanics behind it, the outcome is the same either way. You are more aware, right now, than you were a few weeks ago, of exactly which parts of your inner architecture are solid and which ones are asking for attention. That awareness doesn't disappear when this particular stretch of weather passes. It becomes part of the permanent structure, one more layer of reinforcement you get to keep long after the scaffolding comes down. That's not a coincidence. That's exactly who you've always been, just louder for a few weeks, so you'd finally have to pay attention.